Erik Erikson is famous for his theory of psychological development through 8 distinct stages. He was actually born as Erik Solomonson in Frankfurt, Germany on June 15, 1902. He was born to an unwed Jewish mother, and she felt very shamed for the pregnancy, and that's why she fled from Denmark. But Erik did not know who his biological father was, and a few years later, his mother married his pediatrician, Theodor Homberger, and Erik grew up believing that this was his biological father. But he went to a Jewish school, and he began noticing that he had blonde hair, blue eyes, and he didn't fit in with the other Jewish students. And he actually got bullied for the way that he looked. Now, he contributes this to part of his identity confusion. Being bullied in school for the way that he looked, he thought that he was one person, and when he questioned his mother, she told him the truth behind his birth, and he found out that it was basically a lie. And so when he graduated high school, he kind of felt lost, and he decided he would travel around Europe. His stepfather really wanted him to go to medical school to be a pediatrician just as he was, but Erik wanted to do something different with his life. And so he traveled around Europe for a year, basically homeless, living under bridges or wherever he could find to sleep. After that year, he finally decided he would return to Germany, but instead of medical school, he wanted to go to art school. And once he graduated from art school, he began teaching art at the Vienna Psychoanalytic Institute. Now, his job was not only to teach the students art, but also he was there to sketch. And that's where he actually met Sigmund Freud's daughter, Anna Freud. She ran the institution, and she really liked the way that he worked with the children, and she encouraged him to start training to be a psychoanalyst. He worked in the institute until 1933. While there, one day at a masked ball, he met a Canadian American named Joan. She was not a strong believer of psychoanalysis and actually did not like Anna Freud. But true love prevailed, and they moved in with each other. They've fallen in love and actually found out they were expecting a baby, and that's when they decided that they would go ahead and get married. They had 2 sons, John and Kai, and 1 daughter named Sue. Once 1933 hit, the Nazis have invaded Germany. He's Jewish, and he decided he was going to flee to Denmark. So once he gets to Denmark, he can't find a job because they're not strong supporters of psychoanalysis. So he's jobless. He's at this point had a wife and two sons, and so he wanted to provide for them. Joan's mother lived in Boston and had promised to help them out, help him until they could get on their feet. So they moved to Boston, America. And he worked as a psychoanalyst in Boston for a brief period of time. And once they got their citizenship, this is when Erik changed his last name to Erikson. It's believed that he had heard that his real father's name was also Erik, and he wanted to pay like a contribution to his father, and that's why he chose the name Erikson. But he kept Homberger as his middle name to give honor to his stepfather for basically raising him. So he worked in Boston for just a little while, and he moved around America trying to find a permanent place to live. But we see that a lot with Erik. He has a really hard time finding roots anywhere. He stays somewhere for a few years and he moves on. He went to Massachusetts General Hospital to work. He then Judge Baker Guidance Center, the Harvard Medical School and Psychological Clinic, and human relations at Harvard. He did all of this before 1937. By that time, he decided he was just going to go to California and work for the California University and the Institute of Child Welfare. He stayed there for about 3 years until he decided he would just open his own practice in San Francisco. He did that for 9 years. 1949, he was offered a tenured position as a professor at Berkeley University, and so he decided he would take that opportunity. And he stayed there for 11 years. In 1960s, when he returned to Harvard University, and that's where he retired from. He's really famous for a lot of books that he's written. The first one was in 1938. He didn't actually write that book. He was just used in some of the studies that were conducted for the book. And that book was called Explorations in Personality. In 1950, he wrote Childhood and Society. And that's when he first introduces his views on different stages of psychological development, basically like throughout life. In 1954, he wrote The Dream Specimen of Psychoanalysis in the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association. In 1958, he wrote Young Man Luther, and this was his first full-length psychobiography. And he studied a lot of factors like Martin Luther's childhood that may have contributed to his personality and making him such a right fighter. And mostly it centers on the 5th stage of Erikson's psychological development theory. 1968, he wrote Life Cycle Epigenesis of Identity. 1969, he wrote Gandhi's Truth, and that's centered on stage 7 of his theory. And we're going to come back to Gandhi's Truth and talk about that in a little bit. In 1982, he wrote The Life Cycle Completed, and in 1986, he wrote Vital Involvement in Old Age. I want to go over Erikson's 8 stages of development. It starts at birth and they proceed until death. So stage 1 is from birth to about 18 months, and that's called trust versus mistrust. And this is when babies are very dependent upon a caregiver, and if their needs are all met, such as being fed, loved, cared on, having a clean diaper, then they learn trust. But on the other hand, if they do not have those needs met, or they live in a very chaotic world, they're not sure when it will be the next time they eat, they develop mistrust and they lack self-confidence. So we want, children to have that secure environment so they're feeling confident and secure. Stage 2 is from 2 to 3 years old. That's called autonomy versus shame and doubt. So a child is going to learn self-control at this stage, and that's through a supportive, patient, encouraging environment. They have parents who want them to try new things and encourage them to be independent. But if a child is not given that chance to be independent, such as they have a helicopter parent, does everything for them, or the child is shamed for failure, like when they're potty training, they're scolded. And the children are going to lack self-esteem. They're not going to feel confident like they can do things on their own. And if they do them, they're just going to do them wrong. Stage 3 is from 3 to 5 years old. That's called initiative versus guilt. Children at this stage are wanting to try new things, and they're wanting to be more independent, and they are asking new questions as their brain is growing. But the parents, if they don't support that, they don't encourage that creativity and that spark to grow, the children are going to feel guilty if they feel like they're a nuisance to their parents and their questions are inconvenient. They feel like they're not worthy, basically. But a supportive environment is going to create a secure and confident child who is eager to grow and learn new things. At stage 4, that's from 5 years old to 12 years old. It's called industry versus inferiority. That is when children start school and they're meeting more peers and teachers, and there are more people that are becoming important in their life, important influences. They start to have a desire to fit in, and they want to gain new social skills, and they want to be good at sports. And if they're encouraged to and rewarded for reaching their potential, they're encouraged to try harder and get up again, then they feel a little confident in their ability to set and reach goals. But if they're put down or made to feel like an outcast, then they begin to feel inferior and like they're not good enough. On stage 5, that's called identity versus role confusion. That's from 12 to 18 years old. Children search for their identity, both sexual and occupational, so they're beginning to learn about their body and how they fit in as a sexual person. And also they're learning about maybe what their interests are that might affect what they want to do for the rest of their life. Stage 6 is intimacy versus isolation. That's from 18 to 40 years old. This is when adults explore their relationships with others and they form meaningful commitments. If they don't have friendships and relationships, then they start to feel isolated and lonely, possibly depressed. At stage 7, this is called generativity versus stagnation. That's from 40 to 65 years old. So adults have careers, families, they're making contributions to society, and without those accomplishments, they begin to feel stagnant and unproductive. At stage 8, that's ego, integrity versus despair. That's from 65 years old until death. This is when seniors start to look back on their life. Did they do what they wanted to do? Did they make good life choices? Or do they have regrets? And Erikson believed that a senior at stage 8 who felt accomplished in their life was more likely to have wisdom to pass down to their grandchildren. Erikson, I was going to refer back to that book he wrote called Gandhi's Truth. He actually won a Pulitzer Prize for that book. And then he retired from Harvard in 1970 and won a Jefferson Lecture Award in 1973. That is the highest achievement that can be received by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Huge award, great accomplishment. And he went on to live until 1994. He was in a nursing home and he got sick, and he died on May 12th. He was 91 years old. He has a lot of influences, both psychologists and anthropologists. These are people he just encountered throughout his life that encouraged him to try more, to go down this route. And that was obviously Sigmund and Anna Freud. Henry Murray, he was at the Harvard Psychological Clinic, gave him a job. Kurt Lewin, Hans Sachs. The anthropologists were Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, and Gregory Bateson. Erikson's theories, they really are important in the classroom because teachers can use the information about how children are developing across those 8 stages, which obviously they're not going to be reaching the later ones. For teachers, they're not going to be in stages 6, 7, 8, but we can use the first stages, what the children have gone through, to help us understand better what the child is feeling and how they are going to learn the best. Depending on which age group a teacher is in the class, teaching in the classroom, they're going to need to understand the behaviors of the students and learn how to address them in a healthy way. So the theories focus on how nature shapes a child growing, and we can use nature to help the child grow in the most beneficial way. This is a bibliography, so the websites and articles that I used to complete the lesson. These are reliable sources. You can click on them to go visit the website to read them, and maybe learn a little bit more about Erik Erikson for yourself. You can see there's 1, 4. There are 11 resources here to do further.